Welcome to anybody that's joined us. We're still getting participants coming in. We've got over 50 people sign up, so we're just going to wait a couple of minutes before we kick off, just to make sure everybody comes in, and yeah, we will get started. Shall we kick off, and I can let anybody else that comes in. I'll keep an eye for you. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you so much, everybody, for showing up and being on time. As Daniel mentioned, we have many more people coming. So the first thing I'd like to say is thank you for being here today. And the second thing I'd like to say is that we will try to make this an interactive and engaging session. So please feel free to use the chat feature. We would love to have you right now put into the chat where you live, anything else about you that you'd like to share. Maybe your relationship with addiction, if this is something like why you're here. We'd love to learn a little bit more about you. And we'll also take a little walk around the room for the four of us that are participating today to really lead this event and tell you more about what our personal stories are and what led us to do this today. So before we get into the introductions, this is what we'll be talking about today. We'll talk about the, oh, hey, I see here. Hi, Mindy. Thank you for, oh, awesome. You're working in drug and alcohol addictions. Very, very cool. Awesome. Yeah. And yeah, please, I'm going to just like keep reading it up as people start writing it in. So tell me where you are and why you like it here. Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about a bunch of different things. We're going to be talking about why, let's see here. We're going to talk about the we're going to do like a little introduction to everybody who's on the team. We're going to talk about the science of addiction. Hi, Christian. You are in Georgia. I'm a recovering alcoholic currently in rehab. Thank you so much for sharing that, Christian. I hope this is going to be super helpful for you. Donella, Australia. Wow. Okay. So this, I have no idea what the time is right now. I hope this is not too annoying for you. If you get super sleepy at one point, we do have a recording of it as well that we will share in a follow-up email. 2 a.m. Oh my God. Okay. So either you're a night bird or you're really committed to this. Thank you so much. Okay, so another person from the UK, Daniel here, so who will be talking in a little bit, is from the UK as well. Caroline, Canada, fantastic. Thank you so much. Tom and I are in the US. James, Scotland. Okay, this is very global already. I can sense that. That's very fun. Hopefully, we can all understand each other's dialects and accents. You are coming, and then we have Yash from Winnipeg, Canada. Is it even summer there yet? Okay, I'm just gonna keep. Yes, it is. Very glad to hear that.
Yeah, Canada is beautiful this time of year.
I bet. I've only been there in the winter, and it was cold, but also very beautiful when it's cold. Okay, so in addition to having the introductions to the team, we're also going to be talking about the science of addiction. We're going to be talking about the brain chemistry and the characteristics that are underlying addictions, the psychology of it as well. And then we're going to go in and talk very concretely and practically about living and working during addiction recovery. How do we tackle stress during that period of time? How does that impact us? What are then some things that we can do and think about in that process of time? And then we're going to be talking about the evidence-based self-help strategies that exist. Hopefully, if you guys are struggling with an addiction or you know somebody who is, you hopefully already know that there are a lot of different tools out there that you can use and rely on. And that is something that we are going to compile a list for you today, talk a little bit about them. And then we're going to end with the resources available to support long-term addiction recovery. We already had one person share with us that they are currently in rehab. That rehab can look very, very different for many people. There are a lot of different options that people can take. So this is also an opportunity for you to learn about maybe new ways in which you can explore rehab for yourself. As I already mentioned earlier, this event is going to be recorded. So if for some reason your internet connection breaks or anything like that, you have to leave because somebody needs you, that's totally okay. You'll get a follow-up email where you'll receive a link to the recording. And please share that with everybody. Obviously, we'll get to that in the closing remarks. Okay, anybody else who would like to share where they're from, where they live? Okay, well then I'm going to move on. Okay, so I'm gonna start with introducing myself. My name is Pernille. I also go by Penny by some, so you might hear accidentally a little penny floating in once in a while. I'm from Denmark originally, and that's why you might notice that I have an accent, but I've lived in the US for the last 10 years. I have done my PhD here, and that was in neuroscience, where I was studying a lot of different things, including how our brains change in response to the environment and in response to genetics. I did a postdoctoral fellowship at Harvard. And then in the midst of that, I realized that I wanted to start doing something else. I wanted to have a closer relationship with people and do something that really could make a difference for people that are struggling with mental illness. So therefore, I founded Mind Blossom. And Mind Blossom is all about psychoeducation. What we're trying to do here is that we are providing information to people. And this, during my time in science, I realized there's so many tools that are scientifically proven to actually really work to help people with mental illness. And people with mental illness don't know about them. And so there is this bridge, this gap that we need to cover. And so that's what Mind Blossom is about. So you'll see that we have a lot of different events on our team. We have a lot of people that have struggled with addiction, eating disorders, anxiety. Everybody has a personal story, and we really try to bring the personal aspect into this. So my personal story is that I struggled with eating disorders for many, many years. And as a part of that, I also struggled with anxiety, depression, panic attacks, you name it, that whole nice little category of psychological challenges. And interestingly, there is a huge overlap between addictions and eating disorders. And that's something I have actually researched quite a bit about. So I'm looking forward to also sharing that a little bit today, but more so in future events. Okay, so I'm going to pass that on to Tom, Dr. Thomas Costello, who is going to be speaking to you a lot today too.
Oh, yeah. Hey, everyone. Nice to hear a little bit about who you are and where you're from. I'm Tom. I work here at Mind Blossom as well. I'm also a postdoctoral researcher at MIT. I study something called political psychology, funnily enough. So what that basically is trying to understand how people's beliefs shape the way they interact with the world and their underlying characteristics, and like understand why people are susceptible to misinformation and fake news, that kind of thing. So yeah, that's part of what I do. My background, though, my training, I did a PhD in psychology, clinical psychology. I studied mostly personality and personality disorders, but I was trained as a therapist, though I moved away from that. So to be clear, like, I'm not a clinical psychologist. I'm not practicing. I'm a psychology researcher, even though I have a doctorate. Yeah, I'm eager to share a bit of what I know with y'all. To pivot a bit to my own background, growing up, you know, I dealt with like mood disorders, depression, psychopathology, and pretty severe ADHD. And also so I have some family members who are alcoholics and have substance use issues, as well as friends, and that has shaped how I see the world and these kinds of issues. So that's my background and experience.
Thank you, Tom. Arami is going to introduce herself in just a second, but I'm going to let Daniel introduce yourself first.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Penny. I got it in there. Yeah, so my name's Daniel. I'm based in the UK. I am in recovery from predominantly alcohol and gambling addiction. I was a functioning alcoholic, you could say, for most of my adult life. And I sort of had to learn the hard way about recovery. Alcoholism is quite a progressive disease, so you know it went unnoticed for many years. It just got worse and worse until you definitely cross a line where you can't go back. And once I'd crossed that line, all of the wheels started to come off. So I've been to rehab. I've lost my job. I've lost my family. I've been to prison, and it was really, I had to lose everything to wake up. I had to go through that process. I didn't know anything about recovery. I was full of fear. I had this stigmatized view of what being an alcoholic meant to me, and I was wrong. And I learned the hard way that I was wrong. So it was only really when I came out of prison the second time that I just sort of let myself be. And I wasn't trying to play roles or be people for the world, because all the masks had slipped off. I'd exposed myself. And it was a pretty traumatic experience, but it really taught me to rely on myself for the first time, not rely on material things, status, money, anything else. I just needed to find myself. And in that, I really woke up and I started to be able to sort of see my thoughts. And I think when you're in the midst of addiction, you really believe that you are your thoughts. You are led by your thoughts, and they just peck. It's, you know, if you're not drinking, you're thinking about drinking. And, you know, one is just as bad as the other. And so I started to give life a chance, and I really wanted to understand how I could get well. So rehab hadn't really worked for me. It's not that, I was wishing for a magic wand, and I've since learned that, that doesn't really exist. You have to put a lot, you have to sort of you have to find yourself along that path. And so I started Googling nutrition, exercise, yoga, meditation. I started reading, I picked up my guitar, I got out exercising, I actually talked to people in the present moment for the first time, I listened to music, and all of these things just started to charge me up. And I was speaking to a therapist who recommended I go to one of the fellowship meetings, which I'd just read a book by Russell Brand, which sort of changed my view on the fellowship. And it was really when I met the recovery community that everything that I thought I knew was shattered. And I just realized that recovery is just full of people from all walks of life, different races, colors, creeds. And it blew my mind that people keep well by helping other people. And it drove me to really start Recovolution, I started Recovolution 6 weeks into my own recovery, as a way of bringing together all of the things that I'd had to Google, a technology that would enable online recovery to really be able to flourish, because I saw it being cobbled together by different technologies, and sort of WhatsApp, obviously is not built for purpose. And it seemed to be a bit of a challenge, and I had loads of apps on my phone. So I thought, well, we'll just build a wellness hub when we'll actually build a platform for people in recovery, because there's basically a technology for everything these days. So again, it blew my mind that there wasn't anything to start your recovery or pick up your recovery journey. So that is my story. And, the whole purpose really was to give people years of their life that I didn't have, because the one thing that I realized, my life didn't end when I got to recovery, it just started. And that was at 37 years old. So recovery is possible. I'm living proof of that. And I want to give that to the world, and that's sort of a bit about me in a long-winded way.
Thank you, Daniel. It's a really powerful story, and we'll be hearing more about that through this presentation. Okay, then we have Arami. She is sitting in a car, you might see, because she is a busy lady. Arami, could you please introduce yourself to the people?
Hello, friends. My name is Arami. I am here in Louisville, Kentucky. It's so good to see you all on here. Really looking forward to this. My background is, it's so hard to encapsulate our backgrounds, right? But I was born and raised in Louisville. I've lived all over the world, but I was born and raised here. And I was an adopted kid, like from a very young age. So that's relevant to addiction, because in the 1980s, they didn't tell you things like whether your biological families and parents were addicts. It wasn't considered, really relevant information, and they didn't include it. So that would come to affect me later. And I wanted drugs from a very early age. Like, it's pretty crazy. People think that there's a lot of peer pressure, and that was never the case for me. I was the peer pressure in my school, and I did very well in school. I had a lot of opportunities. I was excelling in life. I was an artist, still am an artist, a writer. But my gosh, I wanted to drink and I wanted to use drugs, and nobody was going to stop me. And I just knew, the myth in my head, I was smart enough to get out of it on my own. I was just going to do it for a little while. So, some of you can probably relate to that not working. And at some point you have lost control. I had lost control. It was a dark road. Daniel talked about some of the places we end up, jails, institutions, and death if it progresses. It's a progressive disease for me. It gets worse over the years without recovery. I've had many relapses. I call myself an alcoholic. Really, an addict is the appropriate term. Alcohol is a drug. I recover through Alcoholics Anonymous, which some of you may be familiar with, and I'll discuss later in this program. And it has been tremendous for me. I will not lie to you. Addiction took me, my life is wonderful now, but addiction took me to homelessness. It took me to jail. It took me to many, many hospitals, many, many detoxes, to rehabs. Each one I thought would save me or fix me. I didn't realize there were a lot of components that go into our recovery. And I didn't realize, as Daniel alluded to, that recovery was possible. I didn't think it would work for me. It worked for all these other people, but I was too smart or I was too special. I had every excuse in the world, and that was my disease talking to me. So today, things are much better. I work for Mind Blossom. Who would have thought my story would maybe be helping somebody and part of my own recovery in my life? I am back in college. I'm finishing my degree, and I'm actually pre-law. So I'm very proud of these. These are not things I thought were possible for someone like me in this lifetime, but they certainly are. I'm no different from anybody else. So let's get going. I love this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's so inspiring to hear all of this. Yeah, I didn't mention this, but I did recover from my eating disorder like after a long time. So I'm also all good now. So we're all in a good space, but we also all are supporting each other and realizing that recovery is really, really difficult to maintain. And that's also something that we can help each other with and ourselves. And so that's really also something we'll be talking about. So wherever you are in the journey, I think we'll have something relevant today. Okay, so I'm going to kick it off with talking about the science of addictions. We're going to talk a little bit about the neuroscience and the psychology, but the first thing I want to say is that there are some statistics out there that I think everybody should know if you don't already. And those statistics are associated with a little takeaway that I would also like to make sure everybody knows. And the first one is that you're not alone. There are in the US over 20 million people that struggle with substance use disorders. Addictions are often invisible. In the UK, over 70% of people with addiction actually have a full-time employment. I think that's really, really important to keep in mind, because oftentimes when you think of the stereotypical addict or the one who's just going to be crazy drunk on alcohol, we think about homeless people, like we think about the people on the streets where it's visibly present to us. But a lot of the people around us, they're struggling too. The CEO of a company can be struggling. The school teacher could be struggling. And that's where we want to try to come in and normalize these conversations and make sure that all those barriers are broken. And then the last of these three sobering stats is that relapse is possible. There is a ton of research and a ton of treatments that are showing again and again that the recovery is possible and relapse is normal. And that's where we want to go in and really, again, try to reinforce this idea. Okay, so let's first have a little crash course in neuroscience. If you don't know anything about the brain, don't you worry, because you're going to know everything about it after this little session. But the first is that I'd like to introduce you to your brain. So your brain is over here, and that's what it looks like from one side. It's in your head, and it's around like a kilo and a half, or a couple of pounds, depending on how you measure these things. But your brain is actually made up of all of these different entities that are called neurons. And here is one depiction of a neuron. And there are millions of them in your brain. Now, there are also some other cells that are also really, really important, but we're just going to talk about the brain neurons today. And those neurons, they are so meshed up together that they easily can communicate. They can communicate via various ways. One of them is via these synapses, where they release neurotransmitters. And if you have read a few articles about addiction, you have probably, and I just mean like normal news articles, you have probably already heard about neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, all of oxytocin, like all these good things that make you feel good. Usually that's how we're talking about them. Now, this is a very simplified way of thinking about the brain, because it also communicates via electrical signals. It communicates via hormones. There's a lot going on inside the brain. But for the purposes of today, it's really important that you keep in mind that we have a ton of different neurons that make up different places in our brains, and they can connect to each other and communicate with each other. And that's actually how we perceive our world and how we start engaging with people around us. Now, if I cut this brain in half, I can start seeing some different brain regions that are really relevant for the topic of addiction. There's obviously many more brain regions than what I'm showing here, but for the purpose of being concise, we're just going to focus on these ones. You'll see that you have these highlighted regions of the brain. These make up the reward brain region. That's the limbic brain network. This network is really involved with reacting and anticipating great feelings. Now, it's also involved in negative feelings, but for the purposes of today, think about it as this is the areas of your brain that are really going to be like, I love this. I'm so excited. Let's do it. It's motivated. It's thrilled. On the other hand, you also have the frontal brain network. It's also called the executive brain network because it is an executioner. It's a thinker. So this network will be a little bit more of a stop button. It will say, let's just think about this one more time. Are you sure? Maybe we shouldn't be doing this. It's the problem solver. It's the one that takes a minute to reflect. Now, all of these, both the frontal brain region and the limbic brain network, are in the same brain, right? Like it's not separated like I'm showing it here, but this is just for the purposes of simplifying it for today. It's really important to understand this categorization when we start thinking about why we develop a drug addiction and why we keep maintaining a drug addiction. So if we take an example here of drugs, let's say ice cream. I really like ice cream, but it gives me some stomach aches sometimes. But every time I see ice cream, I just get really happy. And when I eat it, I think it's really delicious. This can be equated to your drug of choice, alcohol, some kind of Coke, whatever you have. What then happens is that as my taste buds and my eyes are all signaling to my brain, we are having ice cream right now, it's delicious, I'm feeling fantastic, it's actually, these brain regions are actually activating what we call this frontal brain network. So now our limbic brain network, that's really feeling all of the emotions and feeling happy, is triggering this more rational brain network and saying, hey, are you really sure you should be doing this right now? And then automatically what will happen is that this executive brain network will say, yo, slow it down. You should not be this excited about ice cream because you know that it's going to give you a bad stomach ache if you eat too much. What then happens is that this is going to inhibit the drug-seeking behavior. This is going to stop this initial motivation to try to get more ice cream. And I can tell myself, actually, I shouldn't be doing this. Now, once in a while, you can take some ice cream or you can take some drugs. Like it doesn't harm everybody to do that. That's a point we'll get back to in a little bit. But if you continue to use drugs or continue to eat ice cream constantly without any type of rational, rational limitations on yourself, some things are going to happen. And really where things are happening is in how your brain areas are communicating with each other. So you have this limbic brain network that normally will trigger the frontal network whenever it gets any drugs or ice cream. Now, if you continue to use drugs, what actually happens is that this gets weaker. Instead of pretty strongly activating the frontal brain network, it will start activating it to a much less extent. It's more like a whisper now than a scream, like, oh, yay, we had ice cream, it's fantastic. Now it's more like, hey, we had ice cream, but like, don't really worry about it. And then because of that, the frontal brain network is not really engaged. It's not really stopping your behavior. It's not doing this problem-solving, reflective thing that it's supposed to be doing. It starts being much less strong in terms of how it's stopping you from constantly seeking out the ice cream or the drug. And so normally when you would be able to regulate your behavior in terms of, I shouldn't be doing more ice cream, I shouldn't be doing more drugs, it's going to be much less strong now. And that's going to enhance your drug-seeking behavior. So just to summarize this little flow, the more you take these drugs, the weaker the communication between your brain regions, the reward brain area and the executive brain areas become in communicating with each other. And this weakness is really what then enables the reward brain area to really kick off and kind of hijack your brain. And that leads me into a concept that's called liking and wanting. This is really, really important. And I hope that learning about this is going to make a difference for some of you because it's really not talked about that much. So within the limbic brain network, we have these hedonic feelings like, oh my God, the ice cream is delicious. We also have this sense of, I am just really enjoying taking a shower right now. It's in the moment, it's present. This is what we call liking. It's the pleasure that we derive from something, and it refers to how we react to something as well. In the contrast, you have wanting. Wanting is when we are motivated about something. So for example, if I sit now and I think about, oh, I'm going to have ice cream tonight, there's going to be stuff in my brain that's happening because I'm really motivated to get that ice cream. And so it's really our anticipation of how fantastic it will be when I'm eating that ice cream or when I'm taking that drug. Now, you probably heard of the neurotransmitter called dopamine. Dopamine is super important in how we think about drug addictions, how they come about, and why we get them. What I want you to take away from this is that dopamine plays an enormous role in how motivated you feel about getting a drug. So whenever you're feeling like you have a craving, that's dopamine. Whenever you're in the moment of really enjoying something, that's not really dopamine, actually. I mean, dopamine is a part of it too, but you have endogenous opioids, you have endogenous endocannabinoids, you have other types of neurotransmitters that exist in your brain that are really, really involved with whether or not you actually like something. What study has found is that in people that have drug addictions, they find that there is an even higher release of dopamine in those periods of wanting. So people are really motivated to go and seek out a drug. The dopamine is rushing through them. They are like, I want more of this drug. I'm so excited about it. However, in people that have been using drugs for a long time, drinking alcohol, they actually find that when you are taking in the drug, whatever that might be, there's actually a reduction in dopamine compared to somebody who is reacting to the drug who doesn't have an addiction. So what this means is that you can be in a position as an addict where you're super duper motivated to get the drug, but then when you taste it or you consume it, you don't actually like it. And so that is really counterintuitive, and it's difficult to explain in general, but that's how it works. And maybe some of you guys can relate to that, can relate to moments where you have been wanting it, like the whole day you were just, all you were thinking about, like Daniel mentioned to begin with, you spend so much time thinking about the drug. It's almost this, like, it's equally as bad, maybe sometimes even worse than actually taking the drug, right? And so you can hate the drug and still be addicted to it. And this is why. It's because your brain has set up this connection between being really, really motivated, and that's the dopamine that's driving it. This is a really, really complicated thing to change because it works outside of your consciousness. Even if you go into rehab and you're thinking, I'm really motivated, like I'm going to do this, I'm done. There's a lot of people, they'll say, I'm done. Yeah, I'm not going to smoke any more cigarettes. Yeah, I'm done. Poof, that was just way too much. The next day or maybe a week later, you'll be doing it again. You still remember that it didn't feel good in that moment, but the motivation to seek it out is so strong that you will do it again and again and again. And this is why relapse is normal. I want to really normalize relapse here because oftentimes I know, as somebody who tried to recover from eating disorder and I relapsed again and again, that it's not unusual to think of yourself as a failure whenever you relapse. But relapse is really normal. If you try, here is a really nice figure from a published paper that's showing the relapse rates in patients that are struggling with substance use disorders, hypertension, and asthma. See here, hypertension and asthma, these are things where you have to change your lifestyle oftentimes in order to address it. It's not just taking a drug and then you forget to take the drug and you relapse. Hypertension, you have to eat better. Asthma, you have to do specific exercises and stuff like that. Everybody relapses. It's normal. So expect to relapse. During this period, it's biologically expected that you will be relapsing several times. And this is really what I want you to take away from my little blurb today, that recovery is all about retraining your brain. It's about how you are making associations about the things you really like, how motivated you are to get those things. That takes time. That doesn't change overnight. That doesn't change just by being in rehab for 4 weeks, even if it's inpatient, although it's easier there. And that's also something we'll get back to. And I really want to underscore the point that you're not defected. What has happened is that you have learned some unhealthy habits. Some people learn those habits much more quickly. And that is something that we also will try to address here in this conversation. But the big point here is that you can unlearn these habits with the right tools. And we're hopefully going to give you some tools today that's going to be useful. This is a blurb about like what actually is happening in the addicted brain, liking and wanting. It's normalizing that you're really motivated to seek out a drug, but you actually don't like it. And that can be really, really difficult for people to understand if they don't have an addiction themselves. But there's obviously so much more that we can talk about. For example, we can talk about genetics and addiction. We could talk about the teenage brain and addiction. So the teenage brain is very unique because it's still developing. So if you start using drugs during your teenage years, which is very, very normal, and I'll guess if any of you here have an addiction, it probably started during your teenage years. And that's because we're really molding and shaping the brain in that period of time, and it becomes more chronic and more long-lasting. There's also the question of what actually happens in your brain during recovery. And then what happens in your brain and body during relapse? And then who gets an addiction and why? This topic, who gets an addiction and why, is what Tom will now get into. I just want to make a quick blurb about the fact that we are developing a virtual course on addictions as well, where we'll be getting into all of these really, really interesting and important topics. So we will send a follow-up email with more information, but keep your eyes out if that's something you're interested in participating in. And I'm going to pass it over to Tom.
Yeah, thanks, Penny. That was great. So interesting. Right. So what does addiction look like? Not everyone gets addictions, of course, and there's a spectrum of addictive behavior, actually. So it's not really a category. People can be more or less willing to use substances and form habits, and there are individual differences in who we are and what our motivations are, habits that relate to the likelihood that people form patterns and eventually become addicted. The one thing I just want to underscore, and that I hope you take away from this bit, is that human behavior is enormously complicated and kind of occurs across multiple levels or dimensions. So we have this graph here. It's what's called like a biopsychosocial model. In this case, a biopsychosocial model of addiction. And the idea really is that while there are lots of biological risk factors, including some of those related to the neurochemistry that Penny just described, right? Like some people, for example, as I'll talk about in a minute, have like different patterns or less frequent dopamine receptors that are associated with greater reinforcement from substances, that kind of thing. There are also social risk factors, right? Like the environment that you're in and how people around you relate to substances, and psychological risk factors, whether you're impulsive and more likely to experiment with drugs and how reinforcing you find them, that kind of thing. But of course, while these factors are spread out on the graph, in reality, there's like this really high dimensional space. It's almost like they're stacked on top of each other while being spread out. And understanding the interactions between social risk, psychological risk, biological risk is really, really tricky and person specific. So there's no panacea, there's no one way to address likelihoods of using substances. You really have to examine your own situation, look inward, and then also like solicit feedback from other people and try to fit yourself into this picture that I'm describing here. And this applies to all kinds of human behaviors, as I said, not just substance use, but of course, substances are sticky. They are deeply rewarding and hook into the neurochemistry that Penny just described, and that is why they're so difficult to break patterns surrounding substance use. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So first, just some of the biological factors that we know predict later substance use. Genes are a big one. Genes are tricky though, because they also influence the psychological factors and the social factors. So it's not really, I mean, genes are of course biological, but this sort of illustrates the stacking of the different factors that I just described. Your genes can lead you to have different personality traits, or to lead you to notice things in your environment that are more or less salient. And that of course shapes the sorts of environments that you're drawn to, what you find stimulating. And that of course, like, maybe you'll find yourself in an environment that has lots of drugs and substances around, or not. So it's really hard to disentangle like this genetically deterministic, meaning like it's baked in from when you're born, you have these genes, you're an addict, from all these other factors. So it's complicated. But one thing we can see, right, is that there are studies that have looked at the children of people with alcohol use problems, alcohol use disorder, and what they find is that actually the children of alcoholics process alcohol differently in many respects. They have reduced sensitivity to it, they have more tolerance to its effects, and that suggests that there is some like shared biological propensity towards substance use that's distinct from, say, like the personality traits you end up with, or the social environment that you find yourself in. This has also been shown in animal studies, non-human animal studies, where they've been able to selectively breed mice that have a differential propensity for addiction. So they've been able to create animals like that are genetically much more prone to like pulling a lever, being administered cocaine or something like that, right? And they're all raised in the same environment, this kind of thing. So there is, again, this evidence that there's a shared biological propensity that leads to addiction. Thing is, though, of course, that it interacts with your environment, sort of as I alluded to. All of these biological propensities, genetic propensities alone are not going to determine anything. They still have to be activated through the actual use of the substance, and that's always going to be influenced by the environmental factors. The biological risk factors interact with your psychology and your social context. They're all mushed together, as in that initial model. So that's, I think, just one thing to underscore here. And we can head to the next slide. Okay, so psychology, big umbrella, big term. There are lots of psychological and personality factors that have been linked to greater risk for developing substance use. What I mean by personality are these stable habits and patterns that characterize people. So what you're motivated to do, your habits of behavior, this kind of thing. Sometimes people describe personality in terms of these 5 big clusters of traits. They're known as openness to experience, how open to new ideas you are; conscientiousness, how orderly and industrious and concerned about your impacts on other people you are; extroversion, that's one that most people know, right? We talk about extroverts and introverts, so that's how sociable you are; agreeableness, which again, self-explanatory; emotional stability or instability, which is sometimes also known as neuroticism; and finally, oh no, that was 5. Okay, so those are the 5. In some models, there's a 6th called honesty, humility, which is how honest and humble you are effectively. There's interesting work showing that the way that the personality traits cluster differs from culture to culture. So it wasn't until they moved to like looking at East Asian cultures, like doing studies in China, that they identified this honesty, humility, personality cluster. But anyway, people vary. It's a continuous dimension. It's not like you have these traits or you don't. So it's like height. Some people are really tall, some people are really extroverted. But the people at the real extreme ends of the dimension, like if you're like the equivalent of like 7 feet tall on extroversion, that's where you see more problems related to behavior and functioning. And so impulsivity, which is a personality trait that falls broadly under like a combination of conscientiousness and agreeableness, effectively, it's sort of like on the line. Impulsivity is really big for being a risk factor for drug use, and that the mechanism underlying that is pretty straightforward, right? If you're more willing to experiment, as I mentioned, you're more likely to use and find drugs rewarding ultimately.
I think one interesting point just to add in here is that ADHD is incredibly comorbid, meaning that it often co-occurs with substance use disorders. And if any of you here experience that you have ADHD and may, because of that, struggle with impulsivity, it might actually feed into your substance use as well. Totally.
And so I also have ADHD. Reward is really big with ADHD, reward salience. There's emerging work showing that a lot of the attention issues pertaining to ADHD actually stem from like a lack of sensitivity to reward rather than an oversensitivity to reward. So because folks with ADHD or impulsivity or whatever strange reward mechanisms in the brain that are different from other people, because they find most things boring and uninteresting, they're really driven to seek out super salient, super intense experiences that are like impactful. So like kids with ADHD really fixate on things like video games and can focus on them for hours, or whatever, drawing, whatever it is you're into. Because when you find something rewarding, it's like, oh my God, it breaks through the doldrums of boredom, the flatness, and then you're really, really fixated and focused. Right. As yeah, and August says, yeah, and right. So people, it's true. It's like, it's sort of hard to describe to people, and also it's not something that like folks immediately associate with ADHD. And anyway, there's also a massive comorbidity, meaning if you have with ADHD and substance use, meaning if you have ADHD, you're really, really likely to also use substances. So impulsivity, that's a big one. There's also things like expectancies about the positive effects of substances. If you have like something like social anxiety and you think that drinking will make you more relaxed and likable, that belief, which is like a psychological factor, is really going to carry forward into your behavior. This is also true of like, yeah, something like nicotine and smoking can help us focus. Actually, ADHD drugs are dopaminergic, meaning that like they act on a lot of the same like receptors that nicotine does. And caffeine and other stimulants like that can also be helpful with focusing, but of course they're habit forming. And this is also true of like things like cocaine and heroin and so on. So the expectancies are key as well. Another big one is patterns of conditioning and reinforcement, learned behavior. So our brains are really good at recognizing patterns and remembering when things are rewarding and good, and the behaviors that preceded those things particularly. So if you have like a rat in a cage, you can, through patterns of reward, really get it to do quite concrete particular behaviors. And humans are like way better at reward learning than rats are. Drugs, being an incredibly reinforcing salient stimuli, lead us to be very, very good at remembering environmental cues. So one example of this, right, is if people who are smokers just see a cigarette on TV or see a lighter being lit or walk by someone smoking and don't even smell it, your brain starts producing the neurotransmitters necessary to process nicotine before you even smoke. It this is like how the reward learning translates to the neuroscience, right? And that's what causes a craving in the first place, right? Like your brain is anticipating this based on the pattern recognition. Hey, we're going to need to process this dopamine. Let's get ready to do it. And that's why then you crave a cigarette. The same is true with alcohol and other substances.
And that's the sense of wanting.
Right. And if you're in an environment with lots of cues that you've already learned, if you've already been conditioned to respond that way, it's going to be way, way harder to resist the wanting than if you're in a new environment where lots of cues have not yet formed. And this is one reason why, like, being in a rehab facility, being in like a different place, it can be much easier to like not use substances than back in an environment when you get back home. It's not just like having people around to talk to and that kind of thing, although of course that's really important too. And then self-efficacy is important as well, but for the sake of time, I'll move to the next slide here. Okay, so social and environment. This is what I've been alluding to as well. There's lots of work showing that like family influence, what your parents and relatives are like, what they model for you is a really important risk factor for later using substances. This makes sense, right? Like kids' brains are really absorptive, and norms and behaviors are super strong. Like what you see adults doing is then what you mirror and is related to your behavior from adolescence through adulthood. There are also like ways that different cultures attach meanings to substance impact intake. So in some places where like there's much less stigma surrounding drugs, you see different kinds of patterns of responses and different like less negative ramifications for drug use in lots of instances. But of course, that's not always true. There's also things like your neighborhood and exposure to poverty that really matter. One study that illustrates this really nicely, although it's of course more complicated than this makes out to be. Some of you may be familiar with it, is this rat park study. So in the 1970s, there were all of these papers coming out finding that rats in cages would choose to, if they were hooked up to like a little lever with cocaine or heroin, they would choose to pull the lever until they starved to death, effectively. They did it until they died. They were so hooked and they could do nothing else. And it was like this model of addiction that people studied, and it was provided, it was evidence that drugs wholly hijack the brain. And there's certainly some truth to this. But psychologists came around and he took a slightly different approach to this study, to this paradigm, and he criticized it for not being like the real world. So we don't live in these blank cages where nothing but drugs exist. He created something called a rat park, which was a really enriched environment that had other rats, it had toys, it had space to socialize and exercise, and that's kind of what you're seeing here in this picture, right? It was like a haven, a park for rats. And it turned out that when you put the rats in Rat Park and gave them the choice to use water that was laced with morphine and other kinds of drugs versus normal water, almost all of them would just drink the normal water and not use drugs. And they wouldn't pull the lever, there's different formats like that. And this was even true of rats that had already become addicted to these substances in the bland cages. And what this was taken to illustrate, what the argument based on this paper is that addiction is not solely a brain disease. It interacts with the environment in a really important way. And if we translate this to humans, if you have an enriched life with meaning and purpose and relationships and activities, that can sort of diminish the pull of compulsive substance use. That being said, it's more complicated than this, right? We're not rats, we're not in cages. Drugs are really salient. This isn't the whole story, but it is an interesting piece of evidence that sort of illustrates the dynamicism and complexity related to risk factors for substance use. Okay, let's go to the next slide here. So the last thing I'll say is just like highlight how this comes into treatment. Obviously, we know that medications are really important and can help folks manage addiction, substance use problems. And this goes right to the biological, to the neurochemistry. There's nicotine replacement and methadone and so on, but often it doesn't like cure in a like deep, strong sense of the word, the underlying problem. It can alleviate symptoms, but as I think, as Daniel and Arami both spoke to some extent, like there's no panacea, there's no pill that you can take that alleviates addiction. Which brings us to the psychological and social elements that I've highlighted. And these are things that can be targeted in therapy, targeted in conversation, and enhancing meaning and motivation, helping build that self-efficacy, helping like disabuse folks of like ideas of like alcohol makes me more likable and sociable or whatever, and also deal with stress, learn how to cope in other ways, try to fight back against the negative self-talk that can run loose, rumination where we're just thinking and thinking over and over again about all the problems and this kind of thing. Break those cycles. And moving over to social, this is where connection, community, trying not to be around folks who are still like struggling with substance use. And there are even things like family therapy where you can bring parents, children, siblings, whoever else in, and all talk together and kind of work through stuff as a group. These are all really useful, valuable tools that speak to the biopsychosocial nature of addiction.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tom. And so I think that really the big takeaway from this this part of the conversation today is that recovery is possible, that there are biological factors that really feed into it, both in terms of triggering and maintaining it, but there is so much more. Where you grow up, how you're treated, the cues around you, that all influences whether or not you get an addiction and whether or not it's maintained for a long period of time, and also how you respond to treatment. And while it's true that there is no one medical pill right now that can treat addiction, there are many other things that definitely can make a huge impact. And those are some of the things that we're now going to start exploring. So now we're going to turn over to Arami. Arami, she is going to talk about what it's like to live and work while recovering from an addiction. Thank you, Arami.
Correct. Thank you all so much, Tom. That was really great. And Penny, it was wonderful. This is such good information. This is such a holistic way to view how we are. And I don't know where everybody is in their heart about this, but I'm going to tell you right now, I really love addicts. I love us so much. I think we are so fascinating. We have so many talents. And whether we're using or we're clean or we're somewhere in the middle, you know, trying to figure it out, I have such love in my heart for us. We're going to talk about living and working while recovering from addiction. Oh, I see some thumbs up. Yes, you love addicts too. Wonderful. Because as Tom was saying, you know, we look at Rack Park and then we look at maybe human sort of equivalents like detox or rehab. I myself did a 28-day rehab, women only, not leaving, sleeping there, the whole 9 yards. And it is easy to kind of like witness, right? It's kind of easy to go, I've got it now, and I can go out into the world, and you get into the world and you start to just unravel and fall apart because the world is not supporting us the way that my women in the program were in rehab, and you don't have a counselor to turn to, and you're not physically separated from it. So I would love everybody, to the extent that you're able, to grab a piece of paper and pen. I'll give you a second to kind of do that. And we're just going to do a simple exercise. And I'll do it with you, actually. A piece of paper and pen. And we are going to draw a T shape, just a big T. Here is my T. It can be on scrap paper if you like. And Penny, if you will take us to the next instruction. So your T shape is going to be a quadrant. So if you want to write work life, home life, these are very basic areas of our world, relationships with friends or family, you know, family can be a friend sometimes, and hobbies. And these are what we're going to work with right now. Now, this is super simplified. If you will take us, Penny, to the last instruction. In each of these spaces, we're going to identify 2 personality traits that we exhibit in these spaces. We ourselves, us, and 1 priority for us in these spaces. So for instance, in work life, I exhibit a lot of focus, and I work 3 jobs. I'm just picking 1 job, right? I exhibit focus and I exhibit professionalism. Those are my personality traits that really come out in that environment. A priority that I consistently see in my work life is efficiency. That's like my priority. It's got to be efficient. Home life, and you can start doing this as I'm writing or as I'm talking. In home life, let's see, that's harder. Some of these are going to be harder. 2 personality traits are spirituality, I think, can be sort of a personality trait. Friendliness, like it's very important for me to have my home life be very friendly. So friendliness. A priority would be cleanliness. Need my space to be clean. That was not in fact true when I was in an active addiction, but it's true of me at my core. So go ahead, I will give you about 2 minutes just to do this. I wish I had music to play for you.
Well, Arami, maybe in the meantime, could you tell us a little bit about how this has shifted for you? So you just explained some of the things, like how the priorities and the personality traits are expressed now. But what did it look like when you were really in the depths of one of your of your addiction?
Absolutely. Yeah, so that's important. So these traits and these priorities are where we are now. So we're all in different spots. It's okay if you're in active addiction right now. That's perfectly fine. That's where we start. My work life, my personality trait in work life in addiction was more like chaos. I had the personality of chaos. So isn't that interesting how our personalities are not fixed?
Mhm.
If I had more chaos in my work life, in my home life, in my relationships with friends, a lot of them were the same,
Mhm.
then I could continue to use.
Mhm.
So hopefully you've got kind of a little something written down, at least in one of them. And if you'll take us to the next and final instruction. Think about or write down one way addiction affected each of these spaces, whether you are in love with an addict, whether you know somebody who's an addict and it's affecting your home life, your work life, your friends, your hobbies. My mother tries to play cards with people in active addiction. It's really hard. It doesn't work out well. She loves to play cards. She's like a champion bridge player.
Yeah, and if you
So
guys
go
feel
ahead.
like, yeah, if you feel like sharing, please put it into the chat.
Yes.
Anything that you are writing down now, obviously, you can keep it to yourself. That's also totally fine. But I think really the point here is to give yourself a minute to reflect on who you are and how addiction affects that.
I know I didn't show up for my hobbies.
Mhm.
I ride horses. It's a job for me now. I wouldn't show up at the barn. I would be asleep. I would be passed out. I would have every intention of showing up for work. And I would drink too much. And I would think I'm going to go in later. And before I knew it, my shift was over. You know, that was the kind of life I was living. And it's very different today. So feel free to put anything in the chat that kind of like comes to you. Let's see, since I feel addicted to my work. Yeah. And sometimes we can, to different extents, replace one addiction with another.
Mhm.
And it's very common. I'm not even going to say it's always harmful because there is like a little window where you can really get
Mhm.
a little bit obsessed with something that's a little bit healthier than drinking or drugs.
Mhm.
But that does need to be moderated, right? Because
Yeah.
if we feel compelled forever and ever and ever to work ourselves to death, then I mean, we're not really in any better spot than when we're
Mhm.
active chemicals.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Or
can
eating
speak-
or gambling.
Yeah. Yeah. I can speak to being addicted to exercise, where it was really, if I didn't do it, I would freak out. Yeah. Sophie, thank you so much for sharing this. Yeah. Not giving everything, not being present, not being honest, not showing up.
Oh, what a great breakdown. Yeah. It's like night and day.
Mhm.
If you're part of 12-step recovery, like AA, our book will talk about we're Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We're just,
Mhm.
it is very hard to look at a recovered addict and ever imagine that they were your worst nightmare, but sometimes it was true. It was certainly true for me.
Mhm.
Thank you all. Keep putting them in. Stuff is going to pop into your head as we keep talking. If we could go to the next slide, please. And this is just, that exercise was also to show that
Oh, sorry.
it affects everything.
Sorry, I'm the one. That was my fault.
That is okay. We do patience. Balancing our lives in recovery. So now we've looked at our lives, we've looked at the quadrants, we've looked at, wow, hopefully the takeaway was addiction affected everything. Everything. And if you were anything like me, when you were in active addiction, and I was high functioning before I was homeless, I was high functioning and I was living in Europe and I had all these opportunities and I was sabotaging every single one of them because I didn't know how to live. And nobody wants to be told as an adult they don't know how to live. Well, I can get on a plane. I have a job. I have money. That's not the kind of living we're talking about. It could be, but we're talking about being able to manage our emotions and the chemicals in our brain. And to understand the neuroscience, it just gives you a huge leg up. Like into this. It takes the shame out of it for me and goes, oh, it's a chemical thing. Well, I can do a chemical thing, you know. Balancing our lives in recovery. When I began to get sober, and this was not, lest I paint too pretty a picture, I did not go to anybody and say, I am done drinking. I want to get sober. I was forced into it. I was told by no uncertain terms in my 30s by my parents, who I asked to come live with so I could get out of my car. They said, yes, we will fly you to North Carolina if you go to AA meetings every single day. And I thought, fine, I'll say whatever I have to get there, get stable. I'll go to a stupid meeting. I was not in a good place, you guys. I will go to a meeting and I will figure out a way to drink and somewhere else to live. And that was my plan. I ended up staying sober for almost 4 years, or for almost 5 years, actually. But I remember vividly when I tried to live in the world, get a job, make friends in this new place. Everybody had these assumptions when they would find out I was in recovery, because I did tell people you're not obligated to ever tell anybody, but you can. It's okay. You are in charge of your anonymity. What everyone assumes we feel when getting clean and sober. I remember these being said to me. People said things like, you must be so excited. Oh, you must feel such relief. You must be so proud of yourself, or your parents must be so proud of you. You're such a badass. You're such a badass. Enthusiastic. Everyone thought I was like really on board with this at first. You must be so happy. You must feel so grateful. And oh my gosh, you must have so much more energy. You must be so energetic. And that's really nice. I mean, these are nice things. I get it. It was a little bit of a projection, because in the next part here, we're going to see how recovering addicts often feel at the beginning. This is how I felt. And tell us in the chat if you felt these ways too, or if you felt a different way. How we often really feel at first is frightened, tired, exhausted. Our bodies have been through a lot chemically. Confused. Am I in the right place? Am I really an addict? I think I was overreacting. The mental confusion wheel. What I call mean and mad, which is just anger. It's anger. You feel mean, you feel mad. This is what sobriety is. This is what recovery is. Irritable, sad, reluctant, stubborn, low confidence, because we often don't have anything. I didn't have a job, a career, friends, a car. You know, I didn't have stuff. I didn't feel confident. I didn't look great. Didn't feel confident. Grief for people, places, and things. Grief for our old. I thought I was never going to meet any more people. I was never going to have friends because I couldn't get drunk, and I didn't know how to get to know you if we couldn't get smashed together first. These are all valid. And they kind of, if you can imagine these two columns like merging, that's what started to happen for me. I kept going to AA. That was my personal solution. It's not the only solution. That was mine. And I would get these moments of feeling relieved and proud. Then I would feel irritable and mad and confused. And then I would feel kind of happy and grateful. And then I started to work out eventually to control the anxiety. And I would feel energetic. And then I would feel low confidence. And then it was all like, there's no black and white here. So our next piece is going to be at the bottom. And I would just love to impart this. Please give yourself grace, or give the loved one or friend, the person that you're thinking of that's in addiction, please give them grace. Recovery is the opposite of instant gratification, right? We could take a drink or use a drug and we could instantly feel different. And recovery isn't that, it's the long game. I didn't know what the long game was. I had no clue. Everyone in my life had to plan it for me, that long game. That is a learned response to recovery. Oh gosh, what a journey. So living and working while recovering from an addiction. I have a high stress job. I have a couple high stress jobs. And I would love to know what you guys do. So if you have a career, or if you have, you know, something, an area in your life that you focus on that you'd like to share, I've got my eye on the chat over there. So by high stress jobs, for me, I mean the restaurant world, I work in a kitchen. I'm chef. I'm cook. And the horse world. The restaurant world and the horse world are two places that love, love, love to work hard and play hard. And we say it all the time, work hard, play hard, get through the shift. The crazier it is, the more we can drink. You want some cocaine, you know what I mean? Like, it's just a constant. And it's a given for many people that if you go into these fields, you're going to be celebrating with champagne at the end of the night if you're in the horse world, and you're going to be throwing back the drinks at the bar with all your work pals afterwards. That was really hard to figure out. I thought I had to quit those worlds. I thought I couldn't be in them. What I learned in recovery was tools. That's the how to live that we're talking about. I thought that everything was going to be a trigger, and at first you don't know. What I discovered is triggers weren't people pouring alcohol or, talking about, oh, we're going to go drink later. Those weren't really triggering to me. What was triggering to me was emotions coming up, and the confusion, and then the happy. Like, I wouldn't just get sort of happy. I'd be like, I'm the best person on the planet. Like, I was way up here. Grandiosity was a lot of it. I have just done the impossible. I have recovered from alcoholism, and then you just think, maybe I can have some. Maybe I can be like everybody else. It's the maintaining recovery in the midst of a stressful life that gets us. And that's where relapse, I find, tends to come in. Accountant. Stressful. Thank you for sharing that. Global finance operator. Yeah. The more stressful your job is, the more we feel entitled to correct it. Right. What I found is that through the tools that I've learned in recovery, through being a recovered alcoholic, I can maintain so much better, and I don't have to subject my body to poison or toxin to do it. So the interaction between stress and relapse. You think you got it one day, you think you got it, and then you suddenly don't. And if I don't maintain, and I'm saying me because I can only talk about myself, I'm not trying to tell anybody else how they feel or what they do, but I'm going to give you my story because you might take something away from it. That's what I found to be helpful when I listen to other people. I will share something quickly, very personal. If it hasn't been said, my partner and I, almost 3 weeks ago now, lost his daughter, 23-year-old daughter. She died very suddenly, and she died of I don't know if she was an addict. She died of using cocaine laced with fentanyl, is the coroner report. So that, so why am I here when I've got something so personal going on and so much going on? Why am I here? It's because I'm at high risk for relapse right now. I'm at high risk for going, screw it. I can't handle these emotions. Because when I got sober, I can tell you that I knew there were things I couldn't handle. Death, I was sure of it. I couldn't handle my dog dying. I couldn't handle grandma dying. I wouldn't be able to handle a breakup. I had this whole list of things that I can do this recovery thing, but not that. Well, I've found that you can walk through anything. I haven't had a drink over this. If I keep going to my meetings, if I keep doing things like this, if I keep engaged with my community, which you guys are a part of, I have a chance at not drinking today. And if I don't drink, I have a chance at it all. And if I don't use, if I don't go, well, I can take Adderall, but not, none of it's helpful to me right now. I hope that some of this has been helpful, because I do want you to know I'm speaking with authority when I say we can walk through anything.
Yeah. And there's a lot of research backing up what Arami has been speaking here from her personal experience and the experiences that she has observed from others. There's also a lot of research that's really demonstrating how stress is one of the main triggers of the onset and certainly the relapse of addictions. So when you are in these high stress circumstances, this is where your brain, like I was talking about before, and the psychological factors like Tom was talking about earlier, that's really where those start kicking in, and you really start relying on these old habits. And that's why recovering is a lot about retraining your brain and learning not to fall back on that in times of stress. Tom, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, stress is complex. I guess that's the word of the day for me. But the way it impacts you psychologically is like pretty self-reinforcing. You know, it's like cyclical. You get stressed out and you fall out of balance, and then there are more plates spinning that you need to deal with, and the stress goes up rather than down. So what Jeremy just described as like a, you know, speaking to her own experience is I think exactly the way that one would want to go about handling a really serious loss.
Yeah, yeah.
So when an addict, yeah, we all deal with stress in different ways. Some are better than others, but again, I think knowing yourself is really the key.
Yeah, that is a great way to segue into the evidence-based self-help strategies to tackle addiction. So when you are in these moments of stress, when you are in these periods of time where you don't really know what to do, what is something that you can do here and now? And this could be both to help yourself, but also help others. So I'm gonna let Daniel take the word here. He's going to talk about some things that has worked from himself, and each of us are going to chime in. Please add it in the chat if there's something you found that really helped you, regardless of whether or not that's something we're talking about. We'd love to hear what you have found has been helpful for yourself or others.
Brilliant. All right, thank you. And so what I'll do is I'll just work around the clock. And as you say, this is sort of like my sort of experience. We tried to make this relatively mixed, but you know, my view is very much, and I'm fascinated by my brain, the human brain, and I thought it really helped me get in some understanding when I was in rehabs and the books that I've read. And I thought the way that you guys summarized it is invaluable to people, not just if those that have gone through it are suffering, but also family and loved ones. I think it's you know, it's fascinating, and sometimes we can feel a little bit hard done by, but actually just the way it is. And so the way that I see addiction is really it's an experience. It's not a label, and recovery is an experience, not a label. Recovery is a journey. And the truth of it is that nobody can really fix us but ourselves, but everything that we need is inside of us. And these are tools that can really help to access that. You know, I went through most of my life thinking that I had a body and I was my mind. And we are, you know, we have a body and we have to look after our body. And a lot of our bodies have been used and abused, and they are like miraculous organisms that will heal probably the quickest our bodies. And yes, we have a mind, but we can choose to listen and observe our mind. We are not our minds, and it's like accessing what we are deeper than, like what is our birthright, which is our soul. You know, we have layered so much on top of that in addiction, and in life people do that. So recovery is not a way to morph yourself into a different human being. Recovery is a way of peeling all of that shit back and actually accessing who you are. And it was the most freeing thing, take it from someone that's walked from prison a couple of times, to take a few steps in my own shoes for the first time in my life at 37 years old. You know, that is, you know, being free from thought and walking in my own shoes. And the quickest, or maybe the most universal thing, regardless of how you got to recovery, is its connection and people. If you know, it was quite a well-known saying that if addiction is isolation, then recovery is connection, and you'll find no better way of doing that through peer-to-peer support, lived experience. I remember vividly going into a rehab the first time thinking they will not be able to fix me because they will not understand me, and the rehab themselves didn't, but the people there did. And that. And when we started sharing our experiences, it blew me away a bit. And actually, we could have a bit of a laugh about some of our stories because we've done a lot of the things that each other have done. And it blows your mind when you hear other people's stories because it makes it real. It's like this is insanity. Keep doing the same thing over and over again to get the same results, if not worse. That's insane. That's addiction. And peer support is not just about finding your tribe, building your recovery capital, finding the people that can help you in the moment. It's about knowing that there is an endless world of people that you can meet and greet and help. And I think helping others helps you. And it's this self-sustaining ecosystem in recovery that's unlike anything else in the world, because we are, ironically, the most sober and spiritually well group in the universe. And we maintain that by helping other people and giving back what we have learned and what we have experienced. So there, I'm not going to talk specifically about peer-to-peer support groups. You may be in one from a rehab, an alumni. You may be in a fellowship group, which I am. I've also I had experience with Smart Recovery, but there are some amazing sort of more socially driven peer support groups. There's a couple in the UK called the Sober Butterflies, where it's a little bit like the fellowship, but they meet in a coffee house, and they learn from others' experience. They may be a bit more sober curious than the guys in the rooms, but actually you can run both of those in parallel. But it's also, you can also find so much. And this goes back to what sort of Tom was saying about like your social environment. If there is something that you're passionate about, there are recovery groups for this, whether that's knitting, walking, riding, cycling, playing sport. This is exactly that endless world.
Yeah, that's exactly. We'll actually have a slide specifically like mentioning these things too, and we'll send you guys out a resource list on that, so that everything we're mentioning here, all of these golden nuggets, you'll not lose out on it. You don't have to take notes right now.
Sorry, one of my daughter just came in, but and actually, like, being around loved ones for the first time present was like enormous for me. Like, I've got 3 young children, and I literally fell in love with them when I got into recovery. And what actually being present to them was, and that gave me purpose. That like, I realized that they need their dad, and I tried to exit this world, and I thank God that I didn't. And if we move on to sort of meditation or mindfulness, 2 really taboo words. I hadn't given them the second thought. I had a preconceived idea of what that meant. To me, meditation is a way of me having a healthier relationship with myself. And if you try and explain spirituality versus religion to me, like, spirituality is looking inward, and religion maybe is outside. It's being part of something, whereas spirituality is being at one with yourself, and in being at one with yourself, you realize that you're at one with everything. And what it can do is it can open up some awareness to what is real and what is thought. And this again goes back to sort of the previous slides in terms of our inner beliefs, the narrative that we tell ourselves, our preconceived ideas of who we are. Like, actually, how real are they? Do we need to, if we are, I recently found out that I'm autistic, right? And so I'm prone to like social anxiety. So I live with this belief. I called it ABD, always be drinking, that I needed to have a drink to make to be liked, to be fun. And actually, and I started to question these beliefs because they were absolute rubbish. And so in building that awareness and using meditation to just take a minute, just clear your mind, and just realizing that you are good enough, you are worthy, you have a right to be here. You do not have to run and hide from anything, because life is a game that we play. But actually, the only story is your story, and you can manifest that in any shape or form that you want. Anything is literally possible in this world. And actually, you may have been in a social environment where, my mother's like overly anxious, overly protective. So the minute you would tell her that you were going to do something, she would always look for the danger in it. And I just intuitively look for the danger, look for the bad that could happen. And I start to tell myself that that wasn't possible, but actually you can break that boundary down. And in meditating, you can just improve your concentration, because actually you're not doing it, you're just teaching yourself. I mean, breathing is the only thing that we do consciously and unconsciously. You're not going to stop breathing if you stop thinking about it, but actually trying to actually just think about breathing for a period of time, that takes practice. And habit building and practice is the way that we break some of these, these behaviors that we've built up over 10, 20 years that we've basically been conditioned around. And I think we've talked a lot around like emotional sobriety, and for me that was the toughest, right? Actually letting a lot of these things just come about, just present themselves, just being with them. And it can be tough, but we know that they can't hurt us, that we know that they are just thought processes that are evoking thorns in our soul that have dug deeper and deeper over time. But if we do not pull them out, they will just stay there. They will be regressed. And actually that just takes work. But that is just, self-acceptance is something that we just work. That's a lifelong journey for me. And emotional sobriety is part of that. So and I think
I'd like to underscore that just from the pure neuroscience perspective and psychological research. That's a huge amount of research that's coming out that's identifying how mindfulness and meditation really helps people that are in the process of recovering from addiction. Now, it also helps with many other things too, but it kind of ties together. You'll see that cognitive mindset tools are also here on the slide, and they're really connected, just like Daniel said. It's really a way of thinking of yourself, of others, everything around you. It takes time, it takes training. It's really difficult. There are different groups you can join to help you, but scientifically, it is shown to work. So even if you have any bias or stigma against it, where you're thinking that's only, the fluffy teenagers that will do that, the fluffy youth, this is something that really works. So definitely I highly recommend that you try to exploring that.
And I think everybody has a different relationship with meditation or the word spirituality. If you think you're doing it right, you're probably doing it wrong. And if you think you're doing it wrong, that is part of the it's a process, it's a practice. And a lot of our perfection is often in our own imperfections, and these are just things that we can hone and actually just find ways of being with yourself. And actually just like the things that you cannot buy are inner peace, contentment, just basic things that that are just our human birthright that we often forget. And that's what we've been looking outside of ourselves for so long, but actually just being still and just resting, that's like almost like a privilege for me. It's like really peaceful, and you can really hone into your moral compass by just accessing and asking questions. Challenge yourself, ask yourself questions, and you'll get a response. And sometimes that's in a completely different voice, and that some people even call that God. So if we go on to nature, nature is, I think, has got some sort of healing power that can often be unexplained. But also we do know through science that everything is energy, everything is vibration, and like energy, nature gives off almost like an energetic charge that brushes off on us. Actually, it can actually sort of affect our physiology. And it's it's not like a drink or drug where it's going to be instantaneous and it's going to wear off and you're going to get a hang of it. It's just going to be pure and organic. There are techniques that you can do when you're out in nature. One is you can ask yourself 5 questions just to try and keep yourself in the moment. What can you see? What can you smell? What can you taste? What can you hear? And what can you feel? Right? And that is like really, that can really ground you. And in terms of grounding, you can actually do sort of like mindful walking. Try and concentrate on just the steps that you take, right? And it can be really challenging. Just feel literally your feet hitting the ground. And if you get into it, you can actually watch your body make decisions before you've even thought about it. Your body is, and your brain are doing things, 90% of the things just subconsciously. It's a bit like driving, where you'll just react before you know it. And like mindful walking can be really interesting, because if you're going down a path and you choose to go one way or another, or step over something, actually you've done that before you even realize it. And actually just recognizing that can be quite an experience. So reading and education, right? The first thing I knew was that I knew fuck all, and I still know fuck all. And I try and just, then that allows me to be open to ideas. You know, I do not know everything. You know, my way is not the one way, the only way. And it just opens us up to different ideas. And actually that can really span creativity, because you're accessing other people's information to digest. And the more information that you take, the more new experiences that you endure, the more your brain will and like I am like not in a position to say this, but the more that your brain will start, you know, regenerating itself. And you know, personally, I got into things like Buddhism. I was reading a lot around neuroscience, quantum physics. I was like fascinated by rethink. And to me, that really helped with like the egos that I had, right? These personas and these roles that I was playing, they were all fictitious, but actually what is real is just, the only thing I know is that I am. And I know that I came from somewhere. I know I'm conscious, and I know I am this space above my neck. And that is basically all I know. Everything else is just perception, thought, and belief. And you know, that's what fascinates me. That's what is exciting. And other things that you can do, like journaling, is quite good, because actually it's a little bit like, you know, you can take yourself down rabbit holes when you just put pen to paper that you just didn't know that your mind wouldn't take you down, and you just write. I mean, I actually just wrote like the memoir of my life, more for my children, so that they understand where, like, the process, the degeneration, what I was thinking, what I was feeling, and actually just so that whatever they're told, whatever they think, what other people think of me, actually it's a really open and honest account of where I was. So I find these things can be really rewarding, because you feel yourself growing as a human being. And you can actually, you know, in journaling, you can get it all out there, you know, get it out to the universe. That's how you get rid of guilt and shame. Just be honest, be open, get it out there, and it's out there. And you can, like, you need to forgive yourself, and that's and you need to love yourself, because you can't be expected to love anyone else until you do those things.
And just want to give I just want to give a scientific shout out again. The journaling is something that is scientifically shown to really work for a lot of people with mental illnesses, and it's so easy. I mean, you can do it anywhere you are. You can do it on your phone. I do that a lot, where you have a ton of thoughts, get them out. Trust me, it is so much easier if you just get them out on paper. There's a place to put them, and at least you can think about them more clearly. You can show them to others, and you can walk away from them. You can let them be and say, I'll return to those thoughts when I'm ready for it. And then the second shout out I want to give is to education, learning about why am I here in the very grand scheme of things, but also how did I end up like this? All those things that we talked about in the science session of this presentation, they are useful. And getting that deeper understanding of yourself and of others is scientifically proven to really help you in the long term recover or support others recover.
Yeah, I mean, one of the real things that I struggled with as a young child was just the meaning of life. Like, what is the point to it all? And actually, you know, I took the wrong path. But when I came back, you know, recovery brings you back onto the path that you're meant to walk. And I still challenge those thoughts, but actually in a more inquisitive, unfearful way, because whether I know the answers, I've let go of needing to know the answers to everything. and and found some purpose in that. And I was going to say something else about journey. Like, the past is we can only remember around 50% of the past anyway. And like, I think there were studies done on 9/11 where actually people that were there that witnessed it, when they retraced how they perceived it and how they remembered it, actually it was factually incorrect. So you don't have to worry about your past, because you can only remember so much of it. People will remember different things about that moment, so it will be a completely different experience, and you will perceive it in the present moment in a completely different way 6 months down the line, because you will be a different person in that moment. And so you can use the past to learn from, you can share your experiences to help people, but it does not need to be a boulder that you're carrying around with you. You need to let it go. The only thing that is real is this moment. So with exercise, I'm in sort of booms and slumps with exercise. So exercise and nutrition, one of the first things I did was just understand my diet. And what blew me away was I can pretty much Google everything that I learned in school now, right? And I would be cramming this into my brain for, exams. And yet the things I didn't get taught was just how beneficial certain foods are to your gut health. It's where your serotonin is produced. So the things that you put into your body, you will get out. Energy, life, health. It is very important what you put into your body. And exercise was really where the biggest thing that I got to an endorphin boost was like putting on my running shoes again. But when it comes to exercise, personally, I would just find something that you enjoy, build that into your life, go back to the things that you enjoyed as a child. But exercise, it will improve your sleep, it will improve your mental health. Yeah. It can, we battered our bodies, so it will reduce the risk of, and actually you can look after your body and it will start to heal itself. And so you can get it back to almost like where it should be.
Yeah. And here's another scientific shout out. Exercise is actually wrote an article for Psychology Today on this, where I interviewed Arami about her experience with it. Exercise is over and over again proven to really help people. And this is true too for people with eating disorders, which is counterintuitive, right? Because you could think that people with eating disorders probably shouldn't be exercising. That's fair to think. You could also think that an addict, maybe they shouldn't be exercising. Are they going to get addicted to exercising, right? That's totally possible. But over and over again, what we're actually seeing is that exercise really helps reorganize things in your body. And what we were talking about earlier in the science session about how you have to retrain your brain, that's kind of what's happening during the exercise. It helps rebalancing the different neurotransmitters and hormones and all the good stuff that's happening in your body, but also really builds up something that's called self-efficacy. And Tom has mentioned that earlier in his session with the psychological factors. Self-efficacy is how you perceive yourself and how you need to change that narrative of yourself, as going from seeing yourself as a loser, an addict, a failure, someone who doesn't show up for people, to someone who can do that, who can take on challenges, who can do the things that stand in front of them. And also someone who knows that it's okay to ask for help. So somebody who has trust and belief in themselves. And exercise really fits the bill for getting you to that place. And what I really love about it is that exercise is free. Exercise is something you can do in groups. Exercise is something where you can be meditative and mindful during it, and you can do it in nature. And you can even start educating yourself about it. So exercise can be the source of really integrating a lot of these different evidence-based self-help strategies for yourself into your daily life.
I think exercise is really interesting in one thing that I learned is that, I was spending my whole life ranking myself against people, trying to be better than other people. And I realized that the only person I was racing with was myself. And once you realize that, then exercise is just all about, doing it for your body, doing it for your mental health, doing it for you, not to benchmark yourself against somebody else. And that's where it can be quite gradual. It's something that you can, it will breadcrumb, your progress is breadcrumbed behind you. So it's something that you can work with, and like goal setting and just reaching those little goals that you set yourself can be quite rewarding. So yeah, I think exercise sort of speaks for itself in that domain. I've talked quite a bit about spirituality. I think for me this is a journey, and this is a journey about really just really getting into who you are, and I think there are various ways and means to do that, but for me that is really like forget your job and these things, but actually just understanding yourself first and foremost, because we all need a purpose, and we all have a purpose. And I think it's I think when you go inwards and you really realize that, you may look to change your profession or change your circle of friends or change your social environment, and be okay with that. And that can really and that I would recommend anybody do. Don't be scared to be among the right people. There's a good saying that if you want to be the 6th millionaire, surround yourself with 5 millionaires. And if you want to be X, surround yourself with 5 X's. And it's that sort of that thought process. And then with the cognitive mind tools, these are just really strategies, like tools, and they're normally they are evidence-based coping strategies, but they are a way of changing your thoughts and beliefs. And a lot of those are formed between the ages of like 7 to 11, 12, 13, when actually we're not really consciously aware. So a lot of the foundations, our core beliefs, were actually formed before we even knew that we formed them. And then that is how we see the world. And you can challenge those, and you can see the world in a completely different way by going into your own belief structure, going into the way that you talk to yourself, practicing being compassionate, not just to others, but to yourself. Oh, I did that wrong. Well, actually, did you? Is that true? So yeah, there are many ways, and I do see a therapist once or at least twice a month, maybe sometimes weekly, and I don't really go in with any preconceived ideas of anything, but it just gives me we can just explore different things, and I find it fascinating to go into tiny little areas where I'm like, actually, where did I get that belief from? It's fascinating.
Yeah,
right.
That's really what you get out of a therapist is fantastic at that. And there are a lot of different tools. If you were in a position where you cannot afford it, there are some free tools that are out there. And as I mentioned, we are going to be having this virtual course that's going to come out in who knows when, in the near future, and that we'll be talking about those in more depth there, because they are incredibly helpful. And okay, Daniel, do you mind if I move on to the next slide so we can get on with that?
Yeah, I am done. Yeah, I am done.
So this is going to be a continuation of what we just talked about. Instead of talking about the evidence-based self-help strategies, we'll take a look at what are the more resources and treatment strategies that you can partake in your recovery journey. And so first, I'm going to pass it back to Daniel and just let Daniel give a little introduction to what Recovolution is. In our follow-up email, we'll make sure to provide you a link. You can check that out, see if that's something for you. But then Jeremy is going to be talking a lot about the 12-step programs, and we'll continue with all the topics here.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke a little bit about it at the start, really. So I started Recovolution to give recovery a home. So Recovolution isn't a way of recovery, because we're just a technology platform. But what we enable people to do is basically anything that goes on in recovery. So over time, whether it's people, professionals, support groups, sober events, mindful activities, all of this thing, and actually organizations, charities, rehabs, they all have a place to coexist, because it's all about the member, because everybody's journey is different. And there's no one place where you can just get, I reckon I knew about 1% of what was available to me when I was like in amongst it. And that was go to the GP, who basically just said, all right, well, if you want to drink less, just push your pint away from you. Like, that's the advice I got. Like, that's crazy. Or go to AA, and I just wasn't ready. I didn't want to walk to the local community centre for fear of seeing somebody, or for fear of admitting that I had a problem before I was ready to do it myself. And so actually I got into recovery when I was on death's door, and it doesn't need to be that way. And so the idea behind it was just to get everybody on this universal platform and let all the people, all those safe hands, find people sooner to get them into recovery sooner and for longer. So it's a really good resource where we've got hundreds of pieces of content. You can join, it's free, become a member, it's anonymous. You get a news feed of aggregated user-generated content. So, and it's all recovery-based. You can find support groups, you can connect with people in your area, because that's one thing that can be really hard, 3 years in. Well, like for me, it's like, actually, where do I go and find people that like doing what I do in my local area? Because I don't want to go and sit down the pub on a Friday night. Like, and I genuinely don't want to do that, because we've just got so much time, and I want to use that time. So yeah, it's I don't really like, I don't like selling it. So it's just a good resource. It's if my reason behind creating it was, if I had found Recovolution when I was sat at my desk full of fear, would it have brought me into recovery? Would it have made me think differently about recovery? Would I have heard of recovery? Would it have looked like somewhere that I belonged? That's my goal, because addiction costs lives, and too many. So
and I think
that's
I think what's really fantastic about the platform is that it's a really easy first step. It's free. You don't have to go anywhere. You can sit in front of your computer or with your phone, and you can connect with people. You can find resources. So it's a really good place to be. Also, if you're somebody who doesn't have an addiction and just wants to learn about that lived experience and the resources available. Arami, can you tell us about 12-step programs? That's something that you have done a lot in the US, so you can give some input, what that looks like, what that was like for you.
Yes, and many of these are US based 12-step programs, at least AA and NA, Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, are definitely international. You can find them in any country. It's pretty amazing, the scope. I want to say that recovery groups and support groups are two different things, and these are distinctions that I wish somebody had made to me, because I was expecting, there's something that we say in AA, like, don't go to the hardware store looking for bread. And it means, like, don't go to people who don't have the ability to provide, like an active addict can't be a great relationship partner, probably. Don't go looking for bread in the hardware store. So, you need to know where to look for what you need in places that can provide it to you. Recovery groups are going to very basically give you tools. You're going to be changing things about your life. You're going to be in depth. You'll probably be working very closely with other people. For instance, I call a sponsor every day. It's a woman who has, as they say, she has what I want in recovery. I really admire her life, and she's working a good program. That's what I can get in a recovery group, is a sponsor, is people who won't, forgive my language, co-sign my BS, who will challenge me a little bit if I seem like my disease is talking instead of my heart. That's recovery. There's also support groups, and you can use them both. Sometimes they'll come into conflict with one another, and you can end up feeling like a ping pong ball, like, well, who do I listen to? So you need to find what works for you. But I want everybody to know that there is recovery. 12-step is a big one. 12-step is probably the main one. It's not the only one. And again, it even says in our book of 12-step, AA does not have the monopoly on recovery. Those words were written by the founder in 1935. Even back then, they were like, we are not the only. So it's a program that's outlined in a book. It's not a program of people's opinions. The program's already written. If you're getting people's opinions in AA, which you get a lot of that, people are imperfect. I'm imperfect. Take what you like and leave the rest. It's pretty simple. A sponsor in a recovery program is going to help you understand the program, and you're going to be working with that person. That's your person to listen to. So that's a little bit of framing around 12-step. Alcoholics Anonymous is a 12-step program. Narcotics Anonymous is a sister program, also based on the 12 steps. You can go to either. I know heroin addicts who recover in AA, they just choose that. They like it better for whatever reason in their area. And I know narcotic users or alcoholics who really like to go to Nar-Anon because all their buddies go, or sorry, Narcotics Anonymous. They like to go to NA meetings, even though they're alcoholic, because it just works for them. That's fine. The component to AA and NA that is for friends and family, anyone who is suffering from somebody else's addiction, it's called alcohol. Al-Anon and Nar-Anon. I will make the mistake so you all don't have to. These are open to anybody. There is a common misconception that you go to Al-Anon to complain about your addict. That's what people who haven't done this think is probably happening. You're actually going to Al-Anon or Nar-Anon to work on yourself and the codependency that can form from trying to logic with an active user and control issues that can creep up. So it is a way of working on yourself. You don't have to go. You're not supposed to be going to complain about this person that is doing all the things to you. It's not in no way a victim mentality. So that's useful to share because nobody really knows what Al-Anon is until you go, and especially if you go and walk into like not a great meeting, which some meetings are healthier than others. These are meetings full of humans in different places, in different spaces. And if you go into a 12-step meeting and you just really don't like it, one of two things can be happening. One, you may not be ready to be honest with yourself. And I think we've all been there. You don't like what you hear because you want to hear what you want to hear. And I was there for a long time. Two, you may have not found a great meeting. Try another one or try to come back, sleep on it, come back, ask some questions. Just give it a chance is really the key to recovery programs. 12-step alternatives. Smart Recovery was mentioned. That was started in 1994. I know it's US. Daniel mentioned it, so I'm going to guess it's UK as well, and probably beyond. I have not worked a Smart Recovery program. They do call themselves recovery, so I'm actually not sure if they consider themselves recovery or support, but you can find out. It's free as well. All these 12-step programs are free. Smart Recovery is free, to the best of my knowledge.
Yeah,
they will
Daniel, you wanna
pass it.
oh, sorry. You wanna make a comment?
Yeah,
Yes. Smart Recovery is it's more CBT based, so it gives you tools. It gives you they call it like the toolbox, and yeah, it's in the US, the UK, and all over the world. Yeah, and it covers. They use different terminology. It will cover other mental health conditions, and it's all about finding these coping strategies to life. Yeah
Awesome. Okay, hey Ermi, do you want to tell us about the niche recovery group? So Ermi and I,
yes.
we have known each other for several years, and because of that I know a lot about her journey and all the things that she's been doing. And something I always find really exciting is when you can start connecting with people that are like-minded. So Ermi, you've been doing that a lot and you have a wealth of knowledge.
It is interesting. I have a recovery group for every occasion. To Mindy's question in the chat, are the UK AA meetings different to US ones? They may be. Every meeting is different, really. They're all autonomously governed, even though they work the same program. If your clients are open to it, if anybody here wants to know, you can very easily these days, because of the pandemic, look up 24/7 AA meetings in any country and jump on. And you might find one. Some people have that as their main group that they go to. So that may be very useful. You can dial into US AA meetings. I go to one in Ireland because I like the accent. It is what works for you. Okay.
I love that.
Niche recovery groups. are industry specific. They're cropping up more and more and more. I go to AA, but I also go to something called Ben's Friends. It's a industry specific to the restaurant industry, to food and beverage. That's for food and beverage workers who are trying to stay clean and sober, or who are curious about what does that even look like? And they just want to listen and see what's going on. That's a national meeting. And it was started after somebody killed themselves because they didn't get the help they needed from addiction. His name was Ben. His friends have started a group. Religious groups. I have a Jewish recovery group, and we are all AA members as well, but we get together to talk about how to be Jewish with all the wine that it is implied that we drink at every single holiday occasion. We don't have to do that, and we can support each other through that. Lots of religious recovery groups. You know, with the niche, the equine as well. Equine therapy is a big one. You can look in your area. They will often work with addicts and people in recovery. Any kind of recovery. And the only thing with niche recovery groups is because it's usually not a national thing, usually. You just want to make sure the boundaries are correct. There's not going to be a lot of regulation. You want to make sure that it's not somebody that just, oh gosh, read the red flags. Check it through your filters, run it through your stuff, see how they feel about AA, see how they feel about smart recovery, see how they feel about the larger thing, and are you being isolated? Just run it through your like cult mechanisms of stuff. And I'm not saying that to scare you. I'm saying that to be realistic, because we have to be careful in a global society. But those are some options for you. And there's also Alateen. And Alateen is not for teenage drug users. Alateen is for teenagers affected by their parents' drug use, very specifically. And they are for teenagers, and they're supervised by Al-Anon members. And it's very, very good for people who cannot be honest at home, because it gives them a place to be honest that's not a drug place, to be honest.
And we'll make sure to put this all, again, as I said, we're sending all of this out to you as a resource list that you can share with other people, that you can utilize for yourself. Thank you so much for sharing, Arami. Tom, when people want to try to find a psychotherapist for their addiction, what are some things they should be looking for? Finding a therapist is not easy. I say that as a person. I think all the four of us have all been going to therapy. Finding a therapist, frankly, is one of the most challenging things that I have ever done. I'm exaggerating now, but it's definitely very challenging. Can you enlighten us?
Yeah, it can be a bit of like dating in some ways, but mental health treatment, it encompasses a bit more than just therapy. There are a few different professional roles that people can fill. The first is a psychologist, a clinical psychologist, right? This is someone who has a doctorate, a PhD, or a PsyD in clinical psychology. When you're looking for therapists, psychologists, right? Like you'll notice this PhD, PsyD distinction. It's actually kind of a key distinction, because there's two things to consider there. One is a psychologist with a PhD is someone who's training focused on a mix of research and therapy. And then after that, admixture, doing research on psychopathology, mental illness, and other things, or whether the therapies are effective, that kind of thing. And simultaneously working in hospitals, learning how to be a therapist, this kind of thing. Someone with a PsyD just did the therapy part. So they spent just as much time in school, but they were only focusing on how to be a good therapist in treatment. They also did a dissertation, but that's often not as involved in terms of like research as the PhD is. Both degrees, though, in order to become licensed, at least in the US, require a postdoctoral internship at a hospital or like a very intensive treatment setting. Yeah, sure, happy to help. Have a very intensive treatment setting where that's where you really like earn your stripes, so to speak, is actually after the doctorate. So you're a full-time therapist in a hospital for a year or two, out on your own a little bit more. And then after that, there's like licensure exams and things. You need a certain amount of hours. So both the PsyD and the PhD do that. But then the other sort of factor to consider here, and this is like really inside baseball, but I do think it's important, is that the PhD programs are often paid for, Whereas the PsyD programs are like, because they're more of a medical model, right? Like medical school, you're only doing treatment. You often have to pay for the PsyD models. So because of that, the clinical PhD programs are really quite competitive. You're getting paid to learn how to get a PhD and to be a therapist, and lots of people want to be therapists. And so people who go through the PhD tend to be like really conscientious, competent folks. Like, you know, that's like a heuristic you can use, but you're going to get someone great no matter what. There are also master's level clinicians who lots of studies have shown actually for virtually all psychiatric disorders, master's level clinicians are just as efficacious as PhD level clinicians, right? Psychologists. So having someone who's a master's level person means they've gone through a few years of school, they've worked for many hundreds of hours to become licensed, but they haven't done any of the research and they haven't been quite as like trained in lots of different methods. Also, psychologists know how to do like assessments. That's like sort of the specialty of the psychologist, is they're really good at diagnosis. That's where like you differentiate the master's level from the PhD level. So anyway, that was a lot of information. And then we can go to like psychiatrists. Psychiatrists call themselves therapists, and often they're trained to be therapists too, but they're medical doctors, they're physicians. So psychiatrists are going to specialize in drugs, particularly like neuroanatomy, neurochemistry. They are less good at therapy, frankly, unless it's like a very unusual psychiatrist. They're spending much less time on it. They don't have the same kinds of training and focuses. Psychiatrists are really more, they're at the nexus between physical, medicine and therapy. Often you don't see a psychiatrist on like a weekly basis unless you're like going in for medication or it's like an unusual psychiatrist. So those are really the three prongs. And then there are counselors, right? Like addictions counselors, treatment, they're like folks that are working at treatment centers, this kind of things. There's something called like a license for clinical social work in the US, where this is someone who also has like a license to be a therapist. It gets really complicated. I think what you want more than anything, after knowing a bit about these degrees, you want someone that feels good for you and will push and challenge you and allow you to grow and heal, right? And often the degree is not like the qualifying factor there. There are lots of different styles of therapy. They're sometimes called modalities. CBT is one that people talk about, psychodynamic therapy, mindfulness-based therapy, like ACT, right? There's like even things like EMDR where you're like moving your eyes around, and the odd thing about it is that A, different things work for different people, and B, what is common to all of these different modalities, it tends to be really effective by itself, right? So like having someone to talk to who's empathetic, being able to focus on your problems, it can all be effective. The evidence does tend to like preferentially favor certain treatment approaches, but you have to find what's right for you, and that requires doing some digging. Psychologytoday.com has a really good directory that you can go to find folks. But also therapists are going to be really willing to like refer you to other people. You can email, there are listservs where like folks send around is like, oh, I know someone looking for XYZ kind of therapist who has this background. Does anyone know of anyone on the listserv, right? There's all these back channels that if you reach out to like any treatment provider and ask them to help you look or something, most people are going to be willing to help you. So it does require some digging and some navigating like esoteric stuff. But there are people out there who are really good and will help once you get to them.
Yeah, finding a therapist is not easy. And in the resource link, we'll also send out some websites where it's a little bit easier to find one.
Yeah.
But hopefully sorry.
No, go ahead.
Hopefully this information is helpful to also get a sense of what to look for when you get there. Yeah. And then there is residential and inpatient treatment. Perhaps, Daniel, is this something you can comment on from your own experiences? What was that like for you? Did you see it working for some people, not others?
Yeah, I think the one thing that the big thing for me was that I was so dependent on alcohol that I needed to be medically detoxed before you know, anybody would sort of look at me as the problem, you know, because the problem isn't the behavior or the substance. The problem is you, and you're using that problem to self-soothe or to, you know, to change your state of mind. But when you become physically dependent on something, it's very dangerous to come off that. Well, often you can't, because you're like, it's in your brain is screaming at you every day that you need it to survive. But it can be very dangerous. So there are certain situations where it's just imperative that you get yourself into these safer houses. You know, my own experience is that that's really just where it begins. You know, they're quite short term, and it can often be difficult, particularly for your family and loved ones around you, who just expect them to fix you within that time frame. So just realize that that's just the start of the process. You know, they can often be very expensive. There are, you know, different scales of that expense, and particularly in the UK, there are, you know, state funded ones as well. And you know, some will be 12-step based, some won't. Like, I've been to two. One was CBT based, one was 12 steps. They've both got pros and cons. They look at addiction a lot differently. So I think it is not just a very quick decision. The only thing I would say is that, yes, they can work in certain situations. Yes, they can be beneficial in most situations. The person has to be ready and willing to go in, I think. You do need to, you know, be committed to it. It's not like a sure thing that it's going to completely cure you. But, you know, and we talked about, like, it is a process, it is a journey. So I think a bit of due diligence can be, you know, is useful. Not every, I mean, but it's very unlikely that you've got one on your doorstep as well. So you're going to have to travel somewhere. So that means you'll have to, you know, you're going to have to come back. So with the people that you meet in your program, there are going to literally, you know, they're not necessarily going to be, you know, in your local community when you go home. So there's quite a few things to consider. You know, for me, it was, you know, I needed to be in one to be detoxed, and that works. And actually, it was quite surprising just how quickly I felt my mind, you know, my body and my mind responding. So yeah, I think it's just, yeah, if you can speak to anybody that's been through it, to set expectations, just to talk you through it, that would be really important. I wish I'd spoken to someone that had been to a rehab before I went into one, because I think it would have helped.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Daniel. And then lastly, when you go into some inpatient treatments, it might actually happen at a university hospital setting. So for example, here in the US, you can go into the NIH, National Institutes of Health. They have inpatient treatment programs there, but you can also be a part of a research study there. And this might be something to consider if you are again and again experiencing relapsing, and you feel like you're trying a lot of things, but it's just not working, and you're getting to a point where you feel hopeless. And maybe even before, I'd really highly recommend considering looking into different research programs that are currently going on. These are more exploratory. They're not currently having a lot of evidence. It could be things like brain stimulation, for example. I mean, like, they're not putting something inside your brain, they're stimulating from the outside. And these are things that are currently being explored in research, where they're trying to figure out, might this help? Might this more effectively help than other things? Might it specifically help the people that don't seem to really get help from the 12-step programs? And psychiatrists can also be a good segue to get more information on that, because oftentimes they're more connected with the hospitals, like Tom also mentioned. So that's the overview for the resources. That is something we would go more in depth with in a virtual course. So expect to see more of that if you join us for that. And that's really it for the event today. Thank you so much. I know the timing is super complicated for many of you. Some of you in Australia, it's the middle of the night. In Great Britain, you guys, and in the rest of Europe, you are all in the middle of dinner right now. So thank you so much for taking the time to stay with us. In the US, it might be the morning time, the afternoon. Either way, you're probably occupied by something else. So we really, really, really appreciate that you took the time to be here and join us today. And I hope it's been helpful. There are 3 things that I'd like to share with you before you jump off the call. First, check your email. We're going to send out a follow-up survey. And we're going to send that list with all the resources that we have been talking about today. And then we're also going to send a link to the recording. So all the people that didn't have the time or not able to show up to this live event can asynchronously join and see what's going on. Or if you want to share it with people, please do so. We have a lot of future events coming. As I mentioned, we have the virtual course on addiction, but we're also looking to be speaking about mental illness in children, eating disorders, many more. And then we also have live stream panels every spring and fall. And follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn, Facebook. You'll see everything there and be kept on track. And then as the last thing, you can really help us help others. You can donate, follow us on social media. It's like one of the most important things you can do, and spread the word. You'll see that both Recovolution and Mind Blossom, we do a lot of different things. So Mind Blossom, for example, we also go out in person and give workshops and work in schools, in youth centers, different organizations. Recovolution is also doing a lot of different things. So please familiarize yourself with everything else we're doing. Please reach out if there's anything else that we can do for you and your community to have a better mental health. And that's it. So thank you so much. And I hope to see you all again.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
Thanks all. Take care, everyone.